Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to the first ever Magic the Gathering Players Championship here from the Showbox in Seattle. Rich Hagan and Zach Hill with you, and Shouta Yasooka is away. There it is. It's Island into Aether Vial. Zach Hill.
That's what his deck's all about, is casting Aether Vial right there. It's got to be something Finkel with all his counter spells is afraid of.
Turn 1, Celestial Colonnade for Finkel. And away we go, turn 2. Shouta will pretty much straight away crack that land.
19.
I mean, and he's cracking it before he casts Serum Visions, if that's what his plan is. Obviously, if you're putting cards on the bottom, you don't want to then immediately shuffle your deck. But this has got to be going exactly like Shouta wants it to be right now.
Could all be downhill from here. He's got one counter on the Aether Vial. Remember, that ticks up, if he so wishes, each upkeep. So that's his choice. He will set it to a number. Keep an eye on the dice there. Sometimes you end up with multiple Aether Vials in play, set to different numbers, so you've got all sorts of strategic options. And we see what Shouta does now as Jon just finishes shuffling Shota's deck.
Now, what Shouta wants to do is keep it at either 2 for Tarmogoyf or Snapcaster, or 3 for Eternal Witness with Vendilion Click.
All right, so 2 and 3 are the big numbers there. As Jon correctly called it, you heard it there. It is Serum Visions. So Shouta gets to draw a card and then scry 2. Looks at those 2 cards he's got and then chooses where to put them. They can go on top, they can go on the bottom, he can split them. And that will complete his turn.
Looks like he's choosing to put both of them on the bottom, which you've got to be excited about if you're in Jon's seat. That means that he didn't find what he wanted and is looking for something else.
Hallowed Fountain from the original Ravnica collection of dual lands. We're going to return to Ravnica in just a few short weeks.
Now, and this is exactly why Aether Vial is so good in Yasooka's deck. You see him draw Snapcaster Mage after putting 2 cards back. That Aether Vial functions basically as a Sol Ring, as a way that taps for 2 mana as long as he has a creature in his hand. Cards like Snapcaster Mage require you to pay mana for the spell that you're flashing back, but if you're casting it for free, you just have access to every card in your graveyard.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way of viewing what Aether Vial is, because when you talk about it in terms of a Sol Ring, perhaps a lot of people listening to this won't know, but that's one of the most powerful spells from down the years. So there it is, sitting at 2. The Misty Rainforest will go away for Yasooka.
16.
Down to 16, Breeding Pool comes down.
And one of the reasons the card Spell Snare counters for 1 mana anything that costs 2. There's 4 copies in Jon Finkel's deck. One of the reasons it's in the deck is specifically to counter Snapcaster Mage, a format-defining card. But Aether Vial doesn't just cast the spell, it puts it directly into play, circumventing all of Jon's counter magic.
There's also some pretty cool stuff out of the sideboard with Huntmaster of the Fells, isn't there?
Right, exactly. Yeah, you can use that with Huntmaster of the Fells. You haven't technically played a spell, and it can flip immediately.
Comes into play.
Okay.
So we're going to see a Vendilion Click from Shouta Yasooka. It comes into play, but now we're going to see a response from Jon. He's only got 1 mana, but that's okay, because which member? Dismember. I'm going to pay some life, and away that goes. And now we see a hand. You've got a Cryptic Command down the bottom, a Kitchen Finks. There's a Path to Exile there, an Island, Tectonic Edge, and is that a click?
Yes, that's a Vendilion Click in the middle. Now, a lot of the times you want to cast Vendilion Click as an instant on your opponent's draw step on the end of turn. Yasooka cast it in his main phase because Jon only had 1 untapped land. Jon's deck plays both Mana Leak and Remand, which could counter the click if Yasooka waited longer. Instead, he decided, no, I'm going to go ahead and just do this on my main phase and make sure that it resolves.
So Yasooka taking his time looking at those 6 cards in Finkel's hand. See, there's a Cryptic Command on the right-hand side of Yasooka's hand. He's got that Snapcaster we know about. There's a Vapor Snag there, and a Lightning Bolt. That's his 4 cards right now.
And there's a lot of lines you can take here. You can deal with the Vendilion Click with a Lightning Bolt. Can't really deal with the Finks, but I think he doesn't want to get his Cryptic Command Vendilion Clicked if Jon were to cast his.
So Vendilion Click goes away. That means that Jon gets to replace that with a card that's part of the effect of Yasooka's Click. And now Finkel will draw for his turn 3.
He drew into Tectonic Edge and Celestial Colonnade.
Yes.
And I'd like to gain a couple of life if that's all right. And if you want to kill it, I might be a bit persistent about it and gain some more life.
And that's exactly right. The Lightning Bolt, Yasooka's removal spell of choice, Path to Exile, the removal spell from Jon's side. But Lightning Bolt does not match up too well against Kitchen Finks. It comes right back and gains Jon some more life to boot. Now, one of the reasons Jon chose to play this deck is actually because of his mana base right now, with Tectonic Edge and Celestial Colonnade giving him an edge in the late game.
Here we see Snapcaster Mage from Shouta via the Ether Vial, and that means that he can replay Serum Visions out of his graveyard.
This time it looks like he kept both cards on top.
Yeah, you don't want to see that if you're Finkel. Although we're still in the early game, so it's not like we're heading towards disaster. Here now is an Ether Vial number 2, so that will tick up to a different number, almost certainly.
Yeah, I would expect Yasooka to keep maybe one of the vials on 3, one of them on 2, and that just threatens every creature in his deck at any point in time.
Do you ever sit there deliberately putting both to 2 with a little bit of redundancy in case that you're going to see a naturalized type effect, or something just to get rid of one of them?
Certainly. I mean, one thing to remember about Ether Vial, you can't ever tick it down.
Yeah. Once it's up, it's up.
The last thing you'd want is for your Ether Vial at 3, 1 at 2, have a handful of 2-cost spells, and have your Ether Vial at 2 get blown up. So it's something you could do every once in a while.
So Snapcaster trades with Finks. Finks comes back with Persist. 2 more life to Jon. He's back up to 20 now. Players in this format tend to take a fair amount of damage from their lands. That's why you're not seeing a lot of red zone action, but you have seen some life total changes, 16 to 20 right now, here in Game 1 of our first semi-final at the Players' Championship.
Now, Yasooka's deck plays 4 copies of Cryptic Command, 4 Snapcaster Mage, 3 Eternal Witness. Now he hits the 4th land, including 3 blue, 4 Cryptic Command, and that really signals that Yasooka's deck has gotten into an entirely new stage of the game.
Welcome to mid-game.
Exactly, and with only a 2-1 on Finkel's side of the board, even though he has a grip full of cards, Yasooka's got to be feeling pretty good. If his deck doesn't win from this position, you wonder what his deck does at all. You know?
So Jon, with many cards in hand, 6 right now.
And a lot of options right here for Jon. You know, I mean, he can activate his Tectonic Edge, keeping Yasooka off Cryptic Command mana. His Path to Exile doesn't have any targets right now, and he just opts to...
First things first, let's pop in for a cheeky 2.
Another Celestial Colonnade in Jon's hand, threatening to get to the 5 mana he needs to activate the first Colonnade. You know, it costs a lot, but when players start as low as they do in Modern due to the Ravnica lands, Celestial Colonnade can end the game very quickly. Yeah,
we sometimes talk about calling it a clock, which is basically how many turns tick by before you die. So at 4 damage a turn, a Celestial Colonnade right now is a 4-turn clock on Yasooka. That's terminology. Here's another click from the Japanese player. His Ether Vial ticked up to 3, you see at the top of the screen there, and then in it comes. How's about it, Mr. Finkel? And once again, Jon has the opportunity to say, well, let's have it arrive into play, and then I can path to exile it. Yes, again, so much as we saw the Dismember play earlier, now we see a path to exile to take out the click. But of course, this time, Yasooka, and once again, we see the Ether Vial effectively just giving you all that free mana, has options. And he's going to Vapor Snag in response to the path to exile.
An interesting quirk of Vapor Snag, you can't choose not to lose the life just because you're casting it on your own creatures. So Yasooka thinks that a point of life is worth blanking or rendering ineffective the path to exile from Jon.
It's going to be a counterspell war. It's a remand from Jon Finkel. And that occurs.
Now, the remand targets Jon's own path to exile.
Okay.
So he says, okay, feel free to unsummon your own creature and lose a life. I'm going to get my path back and draw a card. So a lot of advantage from Jon being generated as a result of that play.
Then he's going to have another go and say, I don't want you to have it back. I want to take my path to exile back and then do it all over again. And that is what's happened. Shouta goes in search of land. One of the mild upsides to path to exile.
And Yasooka playing a fairly mana-intensive deck, so yeah, getting extra islands and getting a mountain out, which helps him cast the Lightning Bolt in his hand while still leaving up Cryptic Command mana, certainly not trivial.
No, it's not terrible. And in fact, he goes for Forest in the end.
Oh, okay. Yeah, again, he's got enough blue mana. He's got red from the Steam Vents. He only has 4 lightning bolts in his deck, so not too many red spells. Probably doesn't play a basic mountain to go get.
Interesting thing is, though, Jon's got Tectonic Edge.
Oh, he does play mountain.
So potentially he can take the red away.
I think what Yasooka is doing is saying that his Tarmogoyfs and his Eternal Witnesses, even though he can cast them off the Ether Vials, are a little bit more important than redundancy on his Lightning Bolts.
Sure. Finally, we see 4 cards. That all took a very long time. Lots of action going on there. An Island, a Tectonic Edge, Mana Leak, and Cryptic Command.
What this is even though Vendilion Clique is not on the board anymore, the effect still happens.
Yep.
So.
Again, just as that first time round when Dismember was the beginning of the response and the fun and frolics with the Clique. You're going to see a lot of Clique action today, very likely, as we look again at Yasooka contemplating those 4 cards. Does he care enough about either of those counterspells? Because it's always a risk. What do you give them instead? Because Finkel will get to draw a card off whatever he has to put on the bottom of his library.
When you're a player as skilled as these players, having access to perfect information is in and of itself tremendously valuable. But he says, what's more valuable than that is getting the Mana Leak out of your hand so I can use my mana freely. That enables Yasooka to cast Cryptic Command much easier than he would be able to otherwise. It's much harder for Jon to keep open 4 mana for his Cryptic than it is for him to keep open 2 for Mana Leak.
So there's Lightning Bolt to finish off the Kitchen Finks. It was back with Persist the last time, so it's now stopped being quite so persistent, and now it's in the graveyard where, from Yasooka's point of view, it clearly belongs.
This is exactly what we were talking about earlier, seeing an Ether Vial at 3 and an Ether Vial at 2. That means any threat from Yasooka's entire deck can hit the battlefield at any time, something Finkel has to play around. But he does have another Mana Leak, which stops Yasooka from getting ahead with his own Cryptic Commands. And pretty soon he's going to be in range to just start attacking with those Colonnades and force Yasooka to do something proactive. Yeah,
I mean, the thing is, of course, Yasooka's in no particular danger right now. Because Cryptic Commands do actually pretty efficiently deal with creatures. And here is a Cryptic Command. And that sounds like Bounce Draw. So the Celestial Colonnade goes back to Finkel's hand. Yasooka gets a card back. And now we're sort of entering the phase where really Yasooka's starting to want to find Eternal Witness to start bringing things back. He just lays a land, comes into play tapped, the Rootbound Crag, passes back to Jon. And Finkel looks, and he's drawn a land. It's an Arid Mesa.
I will say that in Yasooka's main deck, there aren't that many ways for him to deal with a Celestial Colonnade on a permanent basis. You know, a lot of the time you can Cryptic Command something and then counter it on the way back down, but Jon can just play his Celestial Colonnade again. So Yasooka really needs a Vendilion Clique on the battlefield or some sort of threat, or Jon can just activate Celestial Colonnade over and over again until Yasooka runs out of Cryptic Commands.
So, looking at a big grip of cards for Jon Finkel on the right of your screen. Arguably the greatest Magic player ever lived.
Nah. To say nothing else of the remainder of players in this tournament, one of the most competitive of all time. But yeah, Jon, very frequently the player in the conversation when people were talking about the greatest ever. You know, Paulo Vitor, Dahmer DeRosa, we heard talking earlier about how there's 2 best players of all time.
Sure.
The people he was talking about were Jon and Kai Buddha.
It'd be great to see Kai on one of these sometime soon. So here's the Celestial Colonnade action replay. This time, off Ether Vial at 2, Snapcaster Mage. I'd like to get back my Cryptic Command, and guess what I'd like to do? I'd like to send it back to your hand. I'd like to draw it all. Yep. All very, very controlling and grindy from Shouta Yasooka.
And what we saw Jon thinking about for a long time there was whether he wanted to replay his his Celestial Colonnade and miss out on the attack, or to play a land that comes into play untapped and get an attack immediately with the Colonnade he had on the board.
Sure. So Snapcaster Mage has actually attacked in, and now Jon Finkel's down to 18. The red zone in use by Shouta Yasooka. This time you see the Celestial Colonnade come into play tapped. Snapcaster will attack. Now Jon is going to go to 16. No extra land from Yasooka. He just passes the turn. How many cards? 4 for Yasooka. And I can tell you that there is now, that is a beating of a hand. There's a Cryptic Command, a Thirst for Knowledge, a Lightning Bolt, and An Eternal Witness. There it is.
The Eternal Command of the deck's title.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he wants to do. He wants to cast the Cryptic Command in his hand, generate some value, and then that way he can Eternal Witness it back, getting 4 power worth of creatures on the board. And with that kind of pressure, Jon can't simply rely on his colonnades to attack anymore. They're just not going to outrace the 4 damage a turn from Yasooka's side of the board.
So Jon has decided to use Tectonic Edge #1 to get rid of Steam Vents, and now Tectonic Edge #2, and the plan there is looking like to get rid of all the red sources, but it looks like Yasooka may have something to say about the second edge before that red source bites the dust.
What did he targeted? I thought he was targeting the breeding pool, trying to keep Yasooka.
Okay, so they just rearranged the mana. It is targeting the breeding pool, apparently.
And what's important about that play is that it keeps Yasooka off the 3 blue mana he needs to cast Cryptic Command.
So what is less important is the 1 red. More important is the 3 blue.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yasooka casting Thirst for Knowledge right now, presumably to dig for the 3rd blue source.
Okay, well, I can tell you that that did not happen because he has drawn into what looks to be, seeing there looks like a Spell Snare, a Mana Leak.
How many cards you vote?
4. So there's still 4 cards. Yeah, there was certainly not a land there, so Finkel doing all he can to stifle the plans.
And Yasooka, interestingly, discarding a redundant Eternal Witness. He has one in his hand to keep a Spell Snare, which he can use both against Finkel's Mana Leaks and against any Snapcaster Mages, which is one of the best ways Jon has, actually, of dealing with a Snapcaster Mage that's already on the board.
An actual 2-1 against a 2-1 in the red zone, hitting each other, putting each other in the bin.
And something about the modern format, a lot of creatures aren't very sizable. You know, you win a lot of games just by casting 2-1 creatures over and over again and nickel and diming your opponent.
And here we go with Aether Vial. There's an Eternal Witness. Off we go again.
The Eternal Witness getting back Eternal Witness to really set up the chain. And this is exactly why Yasooka's deck is so powerful in the mid to late game.
Yeah, and it's certainly something that coming into the match, the feeling was that Jon needed to be the aggressor in the classic who is the beatdown. Well, it kind of needed to be Jon Finkel. And now that we enter this phase of game 1, you start to see why. Because when you talk about value, Zach, this idea of, well, I'm playing a card, but I'm getting back a card. So it's essentially like the card was free. So there's card advantage right there. Yasooka now, like you just said, little beaters, but now it's 4.
And that's exactly right. And with Finkel at 16, that's simply 4 attacks from Yasooka to put the game away. He's got the Scalding Tarn now to set up the Cryptic Command in his hand. Aether Vial on 3 threatens yet another Eternal Witness that Jon knows Yasooka has. Very easy to set up recursive Cryptic Commands right now, and it's going to be hard for Jon to come back and put anything meaningfully in the way, especially since Yasooka has a Spell Snare for Jon's Snapcaster Mage.
So 4 power facing down. Jon Finkel of New York.
Now Jon with 5 mana open right now, he's trying to think about a way to muster some sort of defense. He knows he can't just keep taking damage, but with 5 mana and both players playing cards like Mana Leak that really put a constraint on how many mana you can use every turn, a very complicated decision tree for Jon here as he tries to figure out how to dig his way out of this.
So he has a Mana Leak, Snapcaster Mage, there's a Cryptic Command. It's in there, but in the end, 16 goes to 12.
Right, casting Cryptic Command is problematic for Jon if he runs it into Mana Leak. Casting Snapcaster, he doesn't want to run it into Spell Snare. It's just hard for Jon to do anything profitably with only this many mana available. Now, Finkel casting Snapcaster Mage.
And Yasooka says, I tell you what, how about no? Using Spell Snare counters something that costs 2, a converted mana cost. CMC 2. And
Snapcaster Mage at 1 and a blue. Obviously, its converted mana cost is 2. Yasooka exposing himself. He can't cast Cryptic Command right now, so anything that he would need a hard counter to counterspell from Jon, he opens himself up to, but he still has a Mana Leak to provide some amount of defense.
So Finkel now down to 11 as we see another Hallowed Fountain come into play.
And the 11 is actually important here because that actually puts him within range of 2 attacks from the Eternal Witness and the Snapcaster Mage, plus a Lightning Bolt.
Out of the graveyard, yeah.
So it can represent an entire turn. Of course, Jon definitely understanding that, but not wanting to just leave his Arid Maces sitting there, not providing mana. It's a risk he's willing to take. Jon now looking through his graveyard, figuring out what Yasooka can Eternal Witness or Snapcaster Mage back.
Okay.
And Yasooka is like, I'd like to add to my significant graveyard pile and go and find some more land.
It has the option of getting either an island or a mountain, but you have to expect them to want the island here for all the reasons involving Cryptic Command that we've talked about already. Interestingly, very important to have basic lands on the battlefield right now. Jon's already used 2 Tectonic Edges, but he has 2 more somewhere in his deck. The last thing Yasooka wants is to be in a situation without enough blue mana yet again.
Yeah, and we think of Legacy as the format where lands really tend to get put under pressure because, of course, Wasteland is such a big card in that format, which isn't available to modern players. It comes back from Tempest Wasteland.
Yeah.
But even so, land is really important in modern.
Oh, that's exactly right. I mean, there's so many non-basic lands that, I mean, in addition to just mana fixing, you see the double Celestial Colonnade on Jon's side of the board, cards like Mutavault, cards like Eiganjo Castle, very important with Geist of Saint Traft. So a lot of very important non-basic lands in this format.
Yeah, just to confirm, Eiganjo Castle prevents 2 to a legendary creature. So you can sort of take something out of range of unfunny things. You see it there on the right of your screen, thanks to our push tool. Have a good look at that. That's a very pretty card from Kamigawa block. So there's counter and draw.
I believe that was actually tap. Yasooka's creatures and draw.
Tap draw. Yeah.
Right. Yasooka has a mana leak that he could have cast. Either didn't want to run it into Spell Snare or just said, sure, you can buy yourself a turn. Yeah, exactly. And just is quite content to sit on his hand full of very, very powerful spells.
You do have to be very, very patient, though, don't you? Because if you're sitting across from Jon Finkel, you see he's still got 6 cards deep into the game. He's got notional threats on the table. And now he starts offering up another threat in the form of Geist of Saint Traft. He just sort of pokes it towards the table and says, how about this then? And Yasooka will take a look.
Geist of Saint Traft represents a very substantial threat right now with Yasooka at 13 life. That's just above 2 attacks. Yasooka very interestingly casting Mana Leak even though Jon has 3 available mana. He can set up a number of plays. He can let that resolve, cast Eternal Witness, get Mana Leak back, cast Mana Leak again. Or maybe he just wants to tap Jon out, and because he knows the Geist of Saint Traft, not the most effective defensive creature against an Eternal Witness and a Snapcaster Mage.
So, Yasooka takes a look through his substantive graveyard. Finkel has a Geist of Saint Traft that he is potentially going to war over with that Mana Leak waiting to happen. I will pay for it. The Mana Leak goes away. Finkel is now tapped out. Now here's another Mana Leak. Just straightforward, I'm going to use 2 Mana Leaks to counter the 1 spell. Jon adds another land. And at the end of turn, we are going to see Aether Vial for Eternal Witness. It will bring back Snapcaster Mage. Now 2, we'll put Snapcaster Mage into play. That is going to bring me back a Lightning Bolt. Then I'm going to Lightning Bolt.
And that's going to be the match.
Yeah, there we go. So that is game 1 to Shouta Yasooka of Japan. It went long. The plan was that if it went long, that would be good news for Yasooka. And indeed it is. Yasooka 1, Finkel 0. You can qualify for the next Pro Tour. The qualifiers have begun. You could be on the big stage for Pro Tour Gatecrash, taking place February the 15th through 17th, 2013 in Montreal, Quebec. For more information, visit wizards.com/PTQ.
So something we saw a lot in that game was, you know, Eternal Witness getting back Eternal Witness getting back Snapcaster Mage. It's incredibly fast it's amazing how fast those 2/1 creatures can add up. You know, I thought Yasooka's deck much slower, but they can deal 11 points at a time.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, in any sort of standard control strategy down the years, life total really isn't the issue. Well, their life total really isn't the issue.
Right.
Yours is the issue. And then once you've got yourself into the position of strength, really, the whole kind of, look how long it took me to kill him doesn't really matter. There is just a certain inevitability, and whether it turns out to be, because it was starting out very small with just, there was a single Snapcaster going to 18, 16, 14, and then it's joined by an Eternal Witness, and then all of a sudden, yeah, you're just dead. And here it is.
That's exactly right. I mean, I certainly didn't appreciate, I thought Finkel would have a lot more time to sit and activate Celestial Colonnade and just work through those cryptic commands, but after Yasooka starts chaining 2/1 creatures into one another, he can turn the game around very fast.
Yeah, so that was pretty much mission accomplished for Shouta Yasooka in Game 1. But of course, it's not best of 3, it's best of 5 here at the Players' Championship, just as it would be on a Pro Tour Sunday. So let's take a look at Shouta Yasooka's sideboard for you, and we'll see what kind of options he's got to play with up against this blue-white deck of Jon Finkel. So let's take a look at the sideboard. There you see, we've got your Ancient Grudges, you've got a couple of Combust there, 2 Glenalendra Archmage, there's a Grafdigger's Cage, 3 Huntmaster of the Fells, a couple of Spell Pierce, and 2 Threads of Disloyalty. So, Zach, any sense of what we might be seeing here?
Well, it's interesting to talk about the possibilities, because I don't know how many people on the planet know except for Shouta Yasooka. We heard that Tom Martell, a lot of other members of Finkel's team, were trying to help him playtest for this event and this matchup. They didn't know what was coming out of the sideboard. Now, you have to expect Combust was in for something very close to exactly this reason. Both Restoration Angel and Celestial Colonnade hit the dust to Combust. I think I like Huntmaster of the Fells a little bit too. So many players, both of these players have so many cards that you want to cast at instant speed that it's very easy to either flip Huntmaster of the Fells over to its 4/4 side into Ravager of the Fells, or force your opponent to play less than optimally or less than how they'd like to by casting all their spells on their main phase.
Okay, we asked, we sort of alluded to this earlier in that first game, that there is a kind of trick, if you will, not like not sleight of hand, but just a neat little interaction between Aether Vial and Huntmaster of the Fells. Just talk people through that, because we may see that later today.
All right, so we know that Yasooka wants to keep his Aether Vials on 2 and 3, as we saw in the first game. But if he draws a Huntmaster of the Fells, he can tick it up to 4, put Huntmaster into play on his own turn, and if he passes, even though Huntmaster just came into play, he didn't actually cast a spell.
It arrived in play, but the casting didn't happen.
Precisely.
It's the put into play is the key bit, right?
And so that would cause Huntmaster of the Fells to transform the turn it enters the battlefield.
Right, so as soon as Jon starts again, he's got no window to prevent that happening. It's just, yep, there wasn't a spell cast last turn. Here we go. Okay, so that's on that side of the table. What about Jon Finkel? Let's take a look at his sideboard for you. We'll show you what he's got to work with. And this is also an extremely interesting collection of cards. We've got 1 Click, a couple of Negate, a Kitchen Finks, 2 Threads of Disloyalty, 2 Annul, 2 Wrath of God to clear the board, which doesn't seem very likely, 2 Stony Silence, a Disenchant, Baneslayer Angel, and Phantasmal Image. Zach, a bunch of things to talk about here. And I want to start with one of the most fascinating cards there, which looks super obvious that you're going to play, and that's Stony Silence. After all, what else are you going to want to do other than essentially turn off their Aether Vial? But I believe there is a case being made somewhere that maybe you don't bring it in. Explain why you might not.
Oh, there's a couple of different reasons for that. Obviously, the upside of shutting off Aether Vial is huge, but Jon's deck, I think, needs to be the aggressor. And if all you're doing on the second turn of the game is just playing a reactive enchantment, obviously you're setting yourself up to fall behind. I mean, there's other reasons. Yasooka plays Spell Snare in his deck. It can run the Stony Silence right into that. And the thing is, sometimes, like, if he doesn't have Aether Vial, or he has a hand that isn't reliant upon Aether Vial, your Stony Silence is just sitting there putting you down a card, when it's not a Geist of St. Traft, it's not a Snapcaster Mage, it's not one of any other cards that could be in your deck. So Annul, Stony Silence, Disenchant, very good against the Aether Vial portion of Yasooka's deck, but very weak to the Eternal Witnesses, Snapcaster Mages, and Cryptic Commands.
Okay, you've got Annul, which potentially on the play, which Jon is going to be in this game. Potentially you go, there's a land, off you go, Aether Vial, Annul. You feel pretty good about that, but do you Do you risk that? Because as soon as you're past that, if you don't have your annul in the opening hand, Yasooka has his Ether Vial on turn 1, and then you're sitting there, and it's pretty miserable. So do you bring annuls in?
I think a lot of it depends on what your plan is. I can see a reasonable plan of just not playing counter spells, but
okay,
we'll have to see.
Let's get back to it. Down to the table, the players are away in game 2. I'm delighted to say they both kept their opening hands. And Jon has opened with a Hallowed Fountain, and for Yasooka, it's a land into Serum Visions.
Yeah, I mean, he has had turn 1 Serum Visions, you know, or an early Serum Vision. He had turn 2 in the first game. He does not have the Ether Vial, though, so right now Finkel's counter spells are live. Finkel playing a Scalding Tarn, setting something up. I'm looking to see if he has Stony Silence or anything in his hand, but it doesn't look like it.
No, he's got a Restoration Angel, I believe, a Path to Exile, maybe 2 Path to Exiles. In fact, Kitchen Fink, Snapcaster Mage, and in fact, second Path to Exile. So lots of ways to kill things.
And then Path to Exile, very good in this matchup because, I mean, if one of those Eternal Witnesses or Snapcasters that we saw in Game 1 are exiled, he's certainly not going to be recurring them. And given how vital that was to Yasooka's victory in the first game, having access to Path for Finkel, hugely important here. The downside, of course, being that you give your opponent a land, so they're up a card when you cast it, and those creatures have already put them up a card by virtue of their abilities. So Path to Exile might be more of a necessary evil than a card you want a lot of this stage in the game.
Jon Finkel certainly has a lot of fans out there on Cover It Live. The consensus seems to be it's still about a 50-50 matchup, slightly edged to Jon. But we're going to see Kitchen Finks here that is remanded by Yasooka. That gets the remand into the graveyard, a card into Yasooka's hand. And he will lay his third land, and there's an Ether Vial. Off we go.
Ether Vial, huge right now. I mean, he didn't have it on turn 1, but with both Eternal Witness and Tarmogoyf in Yasooka's hand, as well as what it looks like is a Vendilion Click, getting those cards online while being able to protect them with counter magic by keeping mana up is exactly what Yasooka wants to be doing here.
Also, no land there from Jon, but we're going to see the classic upkeep. Let's click you.
Likely a draw step.
Oh, draw step. Yeah. Sorry. But before Yasooka gets to do anything too meaningful.
Right. Certainly before the main phase, before he gets to actually cast any of his threats when he'd ordinarily
He's going to remand that click, draw himself another card. And again, if you're thinking at home, maybe he's getting a little trigger happy with all these cards that he's throwing into his graveyard. Well, don't forget, they're all coming back. That's the plan. Those remands are going to be awesome for him later. So he's not really burning through them in the conventional way.
And we see a main phase Vendilion Click from Jon, or at least a Vendilion Click on his turn before Yasooka gets to untap. You know, Remand seems like a card, not even clear why it's in the deck, right? I mean, if you haven't seen a deck like this before, it doesn't really counterspell, doesn't really deal with a threat. But all Yasooka wants to do is get into the late game.
Yep. Oh, so he clicked himself for a Path to Exile. Jon clicked himself.
And we see Jon having 2 other copies of Path to Exile, so
don't need all of
third
those.
copy a little bit redundant right now.
And also, I do have an actual threat after a click resolves. It's an actual honest-to-God flag beating it.
So now we see Yasooka not getting any additional land drops. There's Cryptic Command's not live right now, but a second Ether Vial ensures that he's got a lot more virtual mana right now than his lands may seem to suggest.
Okay. So we're at 2 and 0 on the Ether Vials right now. Yasooka with 2 mana available, a full grip of 7 cards, including multiple Tarmogoyfs.
Right now, you might be tempted to say, okay, well, I'll just hard cast a Tarmogoyf and Ether Vial 1, but he wants to keep 2 mana up to represent counters.
There's no rush.
Yeah, exactly.
In comes Vendilion Click. And Yasooka falls to 15 here in game 2.
And Yasooka basically just saying, okay, let's see what you have. I'm in no hurry. I'm going to get a Tarmogoyf at the end of the turn.
We're going to see Kitchen Finks from Finkel, and in response, here's Ether Vial for Snapcaster Mage. That means that the 2 mana is available for one of those remands that were in the graveyard. Kitchen Finks will go back. Yasooka will draw a card. Oof.
And of course, that means he doesn't have a Tarmogoyf on his side, but like we keep saying, I mean, Yasooka has all the time in the world. He can dispatch that click the second he draws a lightning bolt if he even kept them in. He's got his own clicks. He's trading 3 damage for 2 damage, which is not the worst rate in the world. And just a grip full of cards you know, he's got to think that sooner or later he can make use of those cards better because of the Ether Vials. And if he's drawing cards and Finkel isn't, eventually, you know, the game's going to be over.
Shouta 15, Jon 17.
Not a lot of love yet for Yuya Watanabe, waiting in the wings for his semi-final against Paulavita Damarosa. Only 5% of you on Cover It Live think he will win the whole thing. I think his chances are quite a lot higher than 5%. We'll see.
We see Finkel drawing another copy of Kitchen Finks. He's got to think at some point Yasooka is going to be out of counters. But Yasooka with Cryptic Command and the mana to cast it by virtue of the Flooded Grove.
So we're going to see Ether Vial for 3. And there's Vendilion Click.
Now, the reason they're going to place it in the graveyard, Vendilion Click, even though it's a 3-mana 3/1, is actually a legend.
Yes, it's not Vendilion, the Click, which is how you would often think of it as being a legendary. But yep, the legend rule, as soon as they see each other, it's like, eek, something wrong with the Temporal Rift, out of here.
Yasooka chooses to target Jon.
See a gigantic hand of stuff. It's a phantasmal image there. We got multiple Kitchen Finks. We got Dismember going on. We've still got Path to Exile. There's a Snapcaster there. There's a Restoration Angel. If you looked, if you just took a picture of those 8 cards and just imagine them in isolation with mana to cast them, you'd think that has to be one of the most absurd hands ever. I mean, it's phenomenal, all the stuff that's going on there. Meanwhile, Yasooka is thinking, I got plenty of stuff of my own.
Well, and it's, you know, Finkel's got a grip full of cards and a grip full of powerful cards, but Yasooka's Ether Vials just enabling him to deploy his resources far more quickly than Finkel's able to. Finkel really stuck right now on virtually one thread a turn. Yasooka casting spell after spell after spell, and the pressure from the Snapcaster Mage. Finkel's going to have to figure out a way to really empty his hand.
So, we click away Restoration Angel, and Jon draws Restoration Angel. This is not Cube. You can have more than one of a card in the deck. So, how about Kitchen Finks? And Yasooka says, how about no? Counter, draw, thanks.
Yeah, just getting the Cryptic Command train started. All he wants to do is look at more cards, draw more Snapcasters and Eternal Witnesses, and keep the card flow up while he beats down. And we do see yet another Cryptic Command, and with Jon unable to have more mana to protect his threats with his own counter spells, those Cryptics are just going to absolutely devastate Jon as he tries to make his threats, you know, useful to him. Jon's sitting there thinking about whether he wants to Dismember or Path to Exile the Snapcaster Mage. You have to think it's going to be Dismember.
Starting.
There it is, and pays the 4 life for that. Jon drops from 17 down to 13.
And that's just got to feel so bad from Finkel's side. Like, you've got to do it to get it off the table. With the Ether Vial sitting at 3, how soon are we just going to see Eternal Witnesses bringing back Snapcaster Mages and have this all be for naught?
Jon still has no land. He just checks that he does have 7 at the end of turn that he doesn't have to discard. Yasooka is going to start the end of Finkel's turn because there's going to be a lot going on here, very possibly, with sacrificing a land. Misty Rainforest goes away, and Yasooka will search up an island. So he's got some redundancy on the blue there. He's got a mountain for his red, so in very good mana shape. He's got all the, as you call it, that virtual mana from his 2 Ether Vials. And here we see the 3 mana Ether Vial being activated for, ta-da, it's an Eternal Witness. And I'd like to get back Vendilion Click.
Yeah, Eternal Witness, unlike Snapcaster Mage, can just get back threats. So
yes.
And with Finkel at 13, Yasooka says, okay, I can get a lot of power on the board right here at the end of Finkel's turn. Why not? I mean, he could be setting up Tarmogoyf and actually casting the Click. He has a lot of options right now.
And now at 2, here's Tarmogoyf. And as you can already see, when you start looking at graveyards, you start seeing lands in there, you see instants, you see sorceries. Tarmogoyf is already pretty big, and at 13 life, not going to be too long before that's a serious issue. Yasooka will untap. We're going to see some upkeep action from Jon. It's a Path to Exile for that Tarmogoyf. That is a speed too far. He has to deal with that.
We see Glenalindra Archmage on Yasooka's side, so that's one card he did choose to sideboard in. Didn't really even think very much just then about protecting his Tarmogoyf. He says, okay, I've got more where that came from. I might as well take another land.
Just ultimate patience. Again, there's no rush.
You know, and you and I have done a lot of talking about the ether vials, and I was sitting there, I didn't really understand how the matchup works, saying maybe you do need this, maybe you don't. After watching this game, I have to say that Finkel, I think, very clearly wants access to Stony Silence. I mean, these vials have just been devastating.
Okay, so you feel that whatever loss in tempo he might have by being a turn 2 play, Stony Silence is outweighed. Meanwhile, we see Snapcaster Mage coming down, and that will be dealt with by Yasooka. Still no.
Well, and even if nothing else, like just the being able to mitigate Finkel's clicks at instant speed for 0 mana with Yasooka's own clicks, it's like he's playing 0 mana terrors, you know, on top of everything else. So without negating those vials, I don't know how Jon's going to ever stick a threat.
Path to Exile for the Eternal Witness. Now, of course, this is one of those situations where destroying and exiling is a very different proposition, because the Eternal Witness Exile means no longer in the graveyard, not available as a comeback target. So maybe this is something that Yasooka might decide to have a think about before he says, sure, I'll go get some more land. But let's see, 4 cards in hand. He's got a click, he's got a Cryptic Command there, he's got a backup Tarmogoyf. We saw one go away, but he's got another waiting in the wings.
And I think you just let this go here, Rich. I mean, Yasooka's got plenty more threats in his hand. He's burying Finkel in card advantage right now. I don't know, you know, it's just a 2-1 at this point. You don't even have another Witness in your hand to get this Witness back. You can certainly use the additional mana. I would guess he's going to let it go, but it looks like that's not what's going to happen.
So we have Cryptic Command.
Oh,
I would like to bounce my own Eternal Witness and draw a card. And now we go back to Finkel, who looks at 4 cards in his hand before drawing a 5th, which turns out to be an island. Not sure who those are signed by. Is that an artist signing? I guess we can find that out later on. But meanwhile, his Vendilion Click from Yasooka.
Now, he tapped low for Cryptic Command. He doesn't know that Finkel has another Restoration Angel. I think Restoration Angel actually very good for Finkel here if it resolves. Yasooka is saying, okay, well, he's got 1 card. I don't know what it is. I can probably afford to tap low right now to get even more value out of my Eternal Witness.
And now we see 5 cards coming down onto the table. Yasooka gets a look. He sees the Phantasmal Image. He sees Kitchen Finks. He sees Restoration Angel. He sees Spell Snare. And he sees that island that Jon Finkel just drew. And he's going to send the image away.
I guess he says, okay, Jon, you can tap 4 mana for Restoration Angel. I'm going to end up dealing with it with a Cryptic Commander or one of his other many threats.
Apparently, hot news. Edward Beard Jr. signed those islands, and I'm pretty sure that's the artist who did them. So there we are.
See Jon drawing a Geist of Saint Traft, which certainly outraces Vendilion Click. Jon's got a lot of options right now.
Those 5 cards in hand. Restoration Angel, just drawn Geist. Yasooka has almost perfect information, doesn't yet know about the Geist that replace the Phantasmal Image.
Yeah, I think Finkel has access also to a Kitchen Finks, which can get him ahead in the race right here and start allowing him to recoup a little bit of this card advantage. Also just blocks Snapcaster Mage and Eternal Witness on the ground if it comes to that. Jon obviously knows that Yasooka has an Eternal Witness, and there's a nice little engine there with Eternal Witness Cryptic Command. It costs a lot of mana, but if you just loop your Witness and your Cryptic, you can draw an additional card every turn, which can, you know, lead to inevitability. You're certainly not getting your Witness countered since your Ether Vial puts it directly into play. Now we see a Geist of Saint Traft being the threat that Jon chooses to deploy, and Yasooka dropping a Tarmogoyf at the end of the turn, putting a lot of pressure onto Jon and kind of stopping the Geist in his tracks if he wants to play defense.
I think those Ether Vials are particularly sexy to people who haven't seen them first time around, because, you know, for people who are playing on the PTQ circuit in formats like Old Extended and so on, you used to play against Vial decks all the time, and they were always super powerful. Here we go. In 7 points of damage, Jon goes from 11 to 4. 14-4, Yasooka adds a land, passes the turn.
And I'm beginning to understand taking the Phantasm, which is why that was such a key play there. Jon, with 2 mana open, could have cast that in addition to the Geist. And if what Jon did was simply cast Restoration Angel, Yasooka has a Snapcaster Mage to Cryptic Command it right back and force through a ton of damage at Jon.
So Jon will attack with the Geist of St. Traft, and surprise, it's a 4/4 Angel right alongside. And Yasooka will activate Ether Vial for 3. Here's Eternal Witness. I'd like to target my Cryptic Command. How many cards? Just 2. So if Jon's going to do something awesome, kind of now is when it needs to be. A comment from Chris on Cover It Live. It smells like 2-0.
Yeah,
could be right there.
Certainly Jon not in an excellent position right here. It looks like he's going to cast Snapcaster Mage.
So, let's see what Yasooka does about that. Yasooka glances towards his graveyard, wants to check scores, wants to check cards in hand. He's circling on his life pad, just off your screen, the cards that he knows Finkel must have and what he may not have. The Geist, of course, wasn't known to him. That was the replacement for the Phantasmal Image. But he's just working out what he thinks he knows, what he knows, and what he'd like to know. 2 for the Ether Vial. Snapcaster Mage. Sending my other Cryptic Command.
Right, certainly making a deliberate point to target a different copy of Cryptic Command, because you don't want to flash it back and then be unable to Eternal Witness the other copy.
You look at the bottom of your screen there and you see those 2 perfectly positioned 2 Cryptic Commands. Sacrifice a land first.
Now it's interesting, there's a lot of creatures on the battlefield with effects that are kind of not on the battlefield yet.
Sure.
They're at least the stack, which is the part of Magic where, you know, all these triggers happen.
Cool stuff's about to ensue.
A lot going on it that's not quite on your screen right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now here we go again, and and the Snapcaster Mage is going to offer up a block to the Geist of St. Traft. Shouta will take 4 from the Angel, but of course that goes away at end of turn.
Kitchen Finks.
Now here's Kitchen Finks, which is going to be countered, and that is enough. Just one little thing to bring you there. You saw at the end there, in Yasooka's hand, there was a Hunt Master of the Fells, so he clearly did have a look at that. So 2 games gone, a maximum of 3 to play here in the semi-final. Number 1, Yasooka 2, Finkel 0. Red Monkey makes unique hand-built leather accessories embodying the spirit of rock and roll. Red Monkey leather goods are designed to break in and only get better with age. For Magic, they make a range of bags, belts, and cuffs featuring the mana symbols and planeswalkers. For more information, visit wizards.com/magic merchandise. All right, Zach, so there we see the 2 players. We're going to take a look at the 2-player profiles, just fill you in on just how amazing these 2 giants of the game are. Jon Finkel there on your right of screen and Yasooka on the left. There is Shouta Yasooka. Let's take a look at his profile. Began playing in 1998. Pro Tour debuts and GP debut both in 2001. And this 28-year-old from Japan coming up well and truly to the height of his career. There you see it, closing in on 300 pro points. In fact, now, once this event is calculated, he will be over the magic 300 mark. And pretty much, that's a big signifier for a Hall of Fame bid.
And that's exactly what I was going to mention, Rich. I mean, 300 is the point where you're sort of automatically in the Hall of Fame conversation. Obviously, the Player of the Year title that Yasooka already has contributing significantly to that. And if he can take this event, that'll be 2 Player of the Year titles. Not very many people can say they've accomplished that.
Absolutely. This is the 3rd time they've played. Currently, Finkel leads 2-0. Worlds 2008 at Memphis and Pro Tour Dark Ascension in Honolulu earlier this year, their previous matchups. But Yasooka, just a terrific player from Japan. And if he sorted out his limited game, boy, oh boy, are some people in trouble. Let's take a look at Jon Finkel then. The master, 34 years old, closing in on 500 lifetime pro points. With his points here, he'll be very close to that mark, potentially reclaiming the #1 all-time spot from one Raphael Levy of France. Hope you're doing well, Raph, and enjoying the show. 14 Pro Tour top 8s. That's more than most people watching this will ever have Pro Tour appearances, period. His resume is ridiculous, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, Jon, again, you know, one of the greatest of all time. You look at the results. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've said that Jon has had a comeback. At what point do we stop using that phrase and just say he's been here forever, crushing whenever he's decided to play Magic?
Absolutely. You look at his overall record, he is almost at 67% win ratio across his entire career at every level. And amongst this 16, this hallowed 16, he's #1 for Pro points. He's #1 for most Pro Tours played, most Pro Tour top 8s, Pro Tour matches. He's right up there in Pro Tour win percentage at #4 there. His overall win percentage, he's 3rd of these 16. But he will need all his expertise to climb out of an Ether Vial 0-2 hole.
You know, you mentioned all those statistics, and those can feel kind of abstract, but something you can just see as you watch Jon play. He's been under these lights before. He's not nervous. The cameras don't phase him at all. He's kind of has the same effect every time he sits down to play Magic.
So we are underway in what could be a deciding Game 3. Finkel fans will hope not. It begins. Yasooka with land. Finkel's got a path to exile in his hand. It's a hallowed fountain there. Yasooka busy setting up a straightforward island. Checks his hand to make sure that that's the right play. And for full text coverage of this play-by-play match, you can check out Blake Rasmussen's text coverage later on in the day. For those who want the full, let's go back and read through everything and look at the decision points. That's something we can do for you on text, as we see Serum Visions from Shouta Yasooka.
Yeah, and Serum Visions right now, Yasooka doesn't have an Ether Vial. He's got to be trying pretty hard to dig to one. Drew a Cryptic Command off the first card, so his deck's primary plan is in action, but his Snapcaster Mage not doing a whole lot right now. He does keep both the cards, though, so he found something that he wants to see.
Finkel. Sounds like Finkel didn't go with Stony Silence in the end, Zach, and I know you like, when you see what Ether Vial's doing, it feels like, wouldn't you want an answer? But honestly, it seemed like the Brains Trust last night were veering towards it not being the correct answer.
And certainly, I mean, it's easy to be results-oriented if you're sitting like we are in the booth watching the last game. But obviously, if they've played, you know, tens of games, they're thinking just theoretically about the match. You can't be too swayed just by how one match went.
I mean, I certainly watched a match where Sam, acting as Mr. Jon Finkel, did turn to Stony Silence, and we all kind of shrugged on the stream and went, okay, well done. What did that do? Yes, it turned off the turn 1 Ether Vial, but still lost the game. And it's a real cleft stick here for Jon. So end of turn, we're going to see Click. Shouta will look at that. He has 3 mana available, a full grip. Are we about to see what is sitting there?
I can't decide if he's gonna either click it in response, you know, play one of his own Vendilion clicks. He could theoretically remand it right back, which is what we saw last game. A lot of options for Yasooka right now, but it looks like he just says okay. Or no, okay.
So here's Click. We do Legend away. By the way, Cover It Live people, have you been watching this match? It's 60%, 40% in the voting in favor of Yasooka. Only 60-40 at 2-0 up. Wow, seriously.
It looks like we got a lot of Finkel fans in the house.
It really does.
64, I mean, you know, Finkel's, I mean, it's important not to count him out. He's a great Magic player, very good deck right here. This game, it doesn't seem to be particularly swaying one way, but being down 2-0 in a best-of-5 match, you certainly need a lot of things to go right. You know, what happens if you mulligan to 5?
So let's see what we've got there. 2 lands, a Thirst for Knowledge, a Remand, a Cryptic Command, and a Snapcaster Mage.
And I see what you're saying, Rich, about Stony Silence. I mean, games like this can happen where, you know, okay, you play turn 2 Stony Silence, Yasooka casts Thirst for Knowledge and might just discard one of the Ether Vials, and now he's up 3 cards. So
yeah, and also, if you're going to do that, then presumably on the play, you're all in. You play your annuls as well. You say, I want to hit, I want to go land, then annul your Ether Vial, and suddenly you've got 3 and 4 cards that are just dead against a deck that utterly buries you in card advantage anyway. Why start at -4, if you like?
Right. Yeah, I mean, these are all really good points. I mean, I guess the moral of the story is I'm glad that it's John that's having to make these decisions and not me, because I'm certainly not sure they're even right answers.
No, I mean, it's just a very, very tough situation. As John looks at those 6 cards, he's got an Iganjo Castle on the right of his hand. As he looks at his grip.
It's challenging to decide what, if anything, to take here. I guess he buries the thirst for knowledge, not wanting to lose out on raw cards.
So what is Yasooka going to get out of that, I wonder? Can't see just yet as he gently puts it in. Oh, I see a Sword of War and Peace there in Finkel's hand, I do believe.
Okay, so he kept those up.
Seen, or maybe brought them back.
Oh, that's...
Because I'm pretty sure Sword came out after game 1. That was certainly the plan last night, but here it is.
Good.
The Blazing Sword of War and Peace.
Yasooka has access to cards like Ancient Grudge, but we saw him sitting in his sideboard earlier today. So what Yasooka's got to prioritize right now is just not letting Finkel stick a threat.
Yeah.
And even something like a Snapcaster Mage right now represents a lethal threat with that sword. I mean, a grip full of cards from Yasooka. I mean, that's Sword of War and Peace is going to hit hard right now.
Yes. Yeah, it deals damage equal to the cards in hand, so right now that would be 7, plus you've got your 2-1 on your Snapcaster, let's say. That's 9 damage in a turn. And when we talk about a clock, that's a clock that's really ticking. That's
exactly right. And I mean, I'm thinking about why John took the Thirst for Knowledge. You know, John, maybe the best player alive right now. All the other cards in Yasooka's hand are things John can play around. Thirst for Knowledge allows Yasooka to be the one making the decisions.
Sure. Neat. Neat.
And when you know you've got Sword coming up, when you know that's what your plan is, I think you want to just kind of remove options from your opponent right now and say, okay, you don't have Ether Vial, therefore you don't have mana advantage. I have more lands. I can neutralize yours with my Tectonic Edge. All I've got to do is stick a 2-1 that has Flash, and I'm probably going to win the game.
Go.
So maybe this is the start of a comeback.
It's very possible that it is. Again, John simply passing the turn, but it looks like he might have a response to the Misty Rainforest. The reason this is significant is that means that Yasooka, even only just for a split second, doesn't have the 4 mana he needs to cast Cryptic Commands.
Right. So John, marshalling his mana very carefully, but with Hallowed Fountain and Plains, pretty much assume this is Snapcaster coming down. There it is, and Yasooka will spend 1 mana to say no, spell Snare. And now John with 3 mana left. Does he have a mana leak to punish Yasooka for not having 3 mana available?
It does not look like he does.
No, so that threat averted. Yasooka will, with one imagines a little internal sigh of relief, get back a land and get himself back up mana-wise.
Yeah, a little bit bold to sacrifice Misty Rainforest there. May have been the correct play, but you're certainly inviting things to happen as you tap low both around Mana Leak and Cryptic Command. On the other hand, with Spell Snare in Yasooka's hand, Finkel might have played exactly into what Yasooka was going for. It's so hard to tell with just all of the cards available to these decks in Modern. It's one of the things that makes the format so exciting to watch.
Okay, so Yasooka will draw, and looks like he's drawn. Is that a Snapcaster you just drew?
I believe it is. You know, Yasooka's Snapcaster is far less effective than Finkel's Snapcasters, given the presence of Sword of War and Peace on the board. That said, I mean, that's how Yasooka plans to win the game, and the more mana he gets, the closer he is to start Snapcastering back Cryptic Commands. Right now, it looks though like he's going to go for just a Serum Visions.
All right, and that is going to cause a response from Finkel. He's got a Spell Snare for Snapcaster Mage, so no. Yasooka then will pass the turn with 3 mana up. Finkel with 5, plus a card that currently does nothing, but has a red alert status all over it, the Flaming Sword of War and Peace.
Now again, with only 3 mana available to Yasooka right now, Finkel knows that he has a window. So this may be a critical turn for this match as Finkel thinks about what he's able to resolve.
He's got Tectonic Edges there as well. So if there is a bit of a squeeze on Yasooka's mana, there's the possibility to do a little more nudging in the wrong direction from a Japanese point of view.
Right, there's the classic Tectonic Edge your land on my first main phase. Okay, you float a mana, whatever, that's great. Go to combat. Yeah. Now on my second main phase, I'll decide to cast something.
Yeah.
That, however, doesn't look like what's going to be happening right here.
And Jon's getting pretty low on cards in hand now, and that's the first time in the match that's been true. He's had any number, and in fact, he just has 2, and it is Cryptic Command and Path to Exile.
And Rich and I didn't even realize this till we just saw Jon's hand. Despite having 6 mana on the battlefield, he does not have access to Cryptic Command mana. So Yasooka is pretty much free to do more or less whatever he wants right now.
There's Tectonic Edge to, as we sort of implied, stunt the growth of the Japanese side.
Not really a lot for Finkel to capitalize on. He says right now, all right, I'll take out your Flooded Grove. Again, trying to stop Cryptic Command and stop some of those 4-mana threats that we saw Yasooka sideboard in, both Glenalindra, Archmage, and Huntmaster of the Fells.
So Yasooka, 5 cards in hand. Now drops 1 of them as a 4th land. Still with 4, and Finkel has drawn his Baneslayer Angel, by the looks of things. Of course, he can't yet cast. Costs 5.
17.
Pretty sure that's right. I don't think it was a Path to Exile, was it? We just saw a little glimpse.
17.
I couldn't quite see it. I mean, you know.
Yeah, it's the 1 Baneslayer.
You've got to feel a little bit awkward if you're Jon, to, you know, going from 6 mana to 4 mana only to draw a 5 mana spell, but you probably don't want to just boldly announce it into the face of Cryptic Command mana from Yasooka. So we're kind of back to seeing, after what was a pretty aggressive start, a main phase Snapcaster Mage with no targets, or not Snapcaster Mage on Jon's end step, but on his turn for no value, threatening an aggressive start with the Sword of War and Peace. Now back to a much slower paced game, much less drama, and this type of pace has got to favor Yasooka.
Oh yeah, I'm hearing you say much slower paced game, and I don't speak Japanese, but I'm translating that into good for Yasooka.
We see him actually manage to resolve the Snapcaster Mage on Serum Visions this time around.
So we'll have a look. There's a mana leak and a green card there.
That's an Eternal Witness, I believe.
Okay, so we're going to assume they're going to stay on top. They certainly are. Past the turn.
Yeah, Yasooka, very aggressive with his Snapcaster Mages. I mean, he's had Cryptic Command mana and is tapped so low that he can't cast it twice now. He's got to appreciate or prioritize the offensive Cryptic Command to just bounce and draw or tap draw far more than simply the dismiss option. Something a little bit counterintuitive, but that has served him very, very well over the course of these games.
Life totals in Magic don't always indicate how things are going. And I've just seen Shouta Yasooka attack for 2 to put Jon Finkel down to 17. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that Snapcaster turning sideways, I think, is a very, very big moment here in Game 3. Because what it tells you is that Yasooka is on the way. He's dealt with everything. That sword is not yet doing anything. Jon has been very unlucky, to be fair, in not finding the 5th land. Partly, of course, it was a calculated risk with a double Tectonic Edge, but he wanted to set Yasooka back. But it is not looking good for Jon Finkel. 14 Pro Tour top 8s. But here, the first semi-final of the Players' Championship, he is right up against the wall.
Now we see another Tectonic Edge from Jon. He's got to sit and think about, okay, do I want to keep Yasooka off red mana right now, or do I need the 5th land? It can allow him to cast Baneslayer Angel, but you've got to think right now that just running it out there is not going to accomplish very many good things. It is important, though. Jon does have a grip full of threats. Having the 5th land lets him cast multiple spells in a turn now and try and stem some of the bleeding that Yasooka is applying right now.
That was pretty terrifying. You see the way the 5 cards just sitting there for Yasooka on the tabletop. Jon passes the turn. And Yasooka's like, I'm just going to sit here for a moment before I pick my cards up. And it's like, well, what's coming now? But here we go again with Snapcaster in, Cryptic Command. And that's going to be, how about we send that away? Because I'd hate you to equip that and do bad things to me.
Right. I mean, that's the thing about the Sword of War and Peace. Not accomplishing a whole lot right now, but it does turn anything Finkel plays into a tremendous threat. Yeah. So if Yasooka, given the amount of card advantage he has in his hand right now, has got to just feel a lot more comfortable without that sword on the board.
Yeah. So here we go. Yasooka untaps. Plenty of mana right now. He's drawn an Ether Vial, which turns out not to be super relevant in Game 3. Certainly too far. Oh, bless you.
I still think you want to go ahead and play that Vial if you're Yasooka right here. I mean, you know, your Snapcaster Mage is not going to kill Finkel anytime soon, and you can certainly appreciate those 2 or 3 mana it'll generate.
Okay.
We see Eternal Witness in the hand, and also just the ability to play your entire graveyard at instant speed. Extraordinarily valuable in a matchup that's this dependent upon the interactions between flash creatures and instants.
Vendilion Click from Jon Finkel.
You got to expect a very quick mana leak here from Yasooka.
Yeah, how about no?
And the thing is, Jon has to tap both of his blue sources, so Yasooka can be confident that that mana leak is not going to get spell snared right now.
I heard you. Okay. 4.
How many cards? 4. Finkel at 5, about to go to 6. He's drawn a Geist of St. Traft. He's got Dismember there. You see the Sword of War and Peace, the Baneslayer Angel. It's a path to exile. And you look at that, and again, the cards in the hand look just terrific. But just being strangled to death by this deck from Yasooka.
This Geist of St. Traft, which is what I imagine Jon's going to cast here. He's got the Iganjo Castle to block Snapcaster Mage permanently if that comes up. But it looks like Yasooka, again, wasting very little time here casting Mana Leak.
Which, of course, Jon can't pay. Has 2 mana available, needs 3.
You got to feel for Jon in this game right here. I mean, he's been 1 blue mana off of Cryptic Command forever. He's been 1 mana off from being able to pay for Mana Leak forever. And the sequence of the draws has worked out pretty unfortunately for him.
For sure. Remand goes into hand for Yasooka.
Yeah, and
Attack for 2.
In this game, just firmly in Yasooka's grip right now. Those Remands with Jon only at 5 mana means that he can basically get a time walk out of them whenever he chooses to.
So here's Dismember.
Shouta 17, Jon 9.
That puts Jon Finkel down to 9. I mean, I guess Shouta pretty happy to see Jon take 4, but it's going to be remanded, so because it's all part of the cost. So it's not even, you don't even get to do it. It's just 4 to my face.
Yeah, I mean that's just brutal right there. Yeah, Jon going to, I think, Path to Exile now, or is he just going to cast Dismember again?
Let's have another go.
A mere 8 life to stop 2 damage.
Or not. A mere 8 to maybe not stop 2 damage. I mean, we know that there's a remand sitting there for Yasooka.
Yasooka definitely thinking about casting a spell. Another option is to just say, okay, you're at 5 life. I'm going to cast an Eternal Witness eventually, but...
He's going to remand the Dismember once again.
And that effectively hard counters the Dismember because Jon now going to 3 life can't ever cast that Dismember again.
Savage.
That is exactly how to describe it, I think, Rich.
B.Tings.
And now tapping low, he can crack the Scalding Tarn, decide to use Serum Visions. And yeah, he doesn't have a counter spell up right now, having used both those Remands, but he can get Cryptic, and Snapcaster Mage only needs 2 attacks to end the game right now. So Cryptic Command can be used offensively, just bouncing something, drawing, saying, all right, what are you going to do, cast it again?
Deary, deary me. We're going to see a Serum Visions from Yasooka.
Okay.
Jon looks at lots of very pretty, not game-winning cards in his hand.
I think Yasooka drew a Vendilion Click, which has got to be exactly what you want when your opponent is at 3 life with no permanents on the board. Or no non-land permanents, I guess.
You just knew someone was going to correct that, didn't you? You could feel it coming.
You get good at getting attuned to what the internet is going to say, having done a few of them.
Finkel draws, oh look, here, have a Cryptic Command. I'd like a Baneslayer Angel. Sure, says Yasooka. And do you want to know why I don't care? Well, here's my hand. There's any number of reasons I don't care. So he draws into Thirst for Knowledge.
I mean, and Yasuo can kind of do whatever he wants right here. Yeah, offensive Cryptic Command, just bouncing it right back, saying, okay, cast it next turn.
Bounce,
we see
draw.
We see Eternal Witness in his hand, which he can cast.
Snapcaster attacks. Jon is down to his last life point. I'm kind of ready to call it, gotta be honest.
Right.
Eternal Witness, get back Cryptic Command. On you go.
And we don't see a lot of tapping out of the main phase from Yasooka's deck, but I mean, the Cryptic Commands, they're writing on the wall right here.
Yeah, Jon is going to draw one last card. He's going to look, but I think we are moments away from a handshake. Well, I mean, I dare say he'll make Yasooka actually turn them sideways. We'll see. But he flicks through 7 cards. That is the game. Game, set, and match to Shouta Yasooka. Eternal Command, and from turn 1 to the last turn of game 3, it was Eternal Command. There was not a moment in that match where he was out of control. Goodness gracious me, just a startling 3-0 sweep. So, Zach, we did feel beforehand that Shouta was going to be favored there. He certainly played it out that way.
And really, I mean, just at no point was Yasooka out of gas in his hand. He always had spells to cast. He always seemed to have the mana to cast them. Some of that's a function of his deck being designed to do that. Serum Vision's really smoothing his draws. Aether Vial providing a lot of mana. But, yeah, just Cryptic Command after Cryptic Command. Eternal Witness after Snapcaster Mage. Just a constant flow of cards. And we really got to see, I think, the games play out exactly as Yasooka would like them to.
Just want to give you a little government health warning. Magic is a game where matchups are kind of important. You have just seen 3 games of utter destruction. And everyone, the storyline this weekend is that Yasooka's deck is absurd and it's wonderful and it's innovative and it's crazy and it's him, and all of that is true. Shouta Yasooka doesn't necessarily think he's going to win this thing. He is going to be glued to the second semi-final between Yuya Watanabe and Paulo Vitor Dama de Rosa. That is Jund against Zoo. Jund for Watanabe, Zoo for Paulo. I've got to tell you, Yasooka has someone he'd like to see in the final and someone he really would rather not. So if you think it's all over because you've just watched all this carnage, it really isn't. Don't you dare go away. Semi-final 2 is coming up around about 10 minutes from now. But for now, let's hand you back to the best in the business. In Studio B, it's Marshall Sutcliffe and Sheldon Menery.